Let's continue. So we're going to use the same system that we're using to check against the other buildings to check against the city block. So let's just copy these group nodes again. Let's go and find them. It's these three: inside city block, outside city block, and spillover buildings. Control C and Control V. And we can wire the inside city block into Blast 1. Let's turn off this template. Let's go ahead and rename all our group nodes. So inside city block 2, outside city block 2, and spillover buildings 2. Inside city block and the second input should still be connected to that city block shape, which it is right there. Let's also check inside city block 2 that we're actually looking at the correct groups. So inside city block should now be inside city block 2. That comes back then. And $S should automatically evaluate to the correct name because that's just the name of the node itself. And on the second group node, we'll have to do the same. Might take a second to cook. We don't have to do anything on the combine tab. This one should be set to edges, and on the outside city block, we should also change that to 2. And once that's cooked correctly, we can already see, once we visualize or actually select the spillover buildings 2 node, that we have the building in the center being left alone and everyone else is being selected for removal. So that's working again. And as the same technique before, drop down another blast, get spillover buildings 2, just Control C the name this time, pipe it in, and put it in the group. And we're left with the building that fits. Great. Let's zoom out a bit and move everything underneath DOP import down to below we're working, right there. And what we want to do is we want to merge together the city block simulation, this one, with the newly detected building that we're left with, so that we make one city block. So let's drop down and merge. Make sure that we move the unpack above the merge, otherwise it's going to be unpacking half of it twice. So right now we're unpacking from the DOP import, but we're also unpacking from the import city blocks. So they're both being unpacked before the merge, and that should work. Let's visualize the merge. Yep, and that does work. Just to be precise, let's visualize or template our city block bounding box. Let's hold Shift so we can template it together with the filler building. And we can see that everything now nicely fits inside. Let's move down our chain and have a look at our delete node at the bottom, right there. And it seems to be deleting all the right buildings, but we can still see that this building in the middle does not have a center point left. And there is a reason for this. And this reason is that we are importing a building cluster here that has buildings with the same name as buildings in our DOP import. And a way to remedy this is to simply redo the name values. We can drop down an assemble node to fix that. So let's drop down an assemble node and let's place it between the merge and the pack. And we want to turn on create name attribute, which already is ticked on. So that should already work. And if we now look at our center building, we can see that it does now have a center point as we expect it to have. So that's also fixed. Let's also double check on our attribute copy the spreadsheet and check our attributes. So we have quite a few points in our cluster. It makes about sense, 33 in this case. Let's see, we have building height, we have their position, of course, the building ID is still there, the building type is there. I can see that we've actually used a houses cluster and one commercial building, and we have the normal original block, etc. there. The reason is because we're using a commercial filler cluster while the main buildings are houses. It really doesn't matter for the simulation or for the example. But of course, if you want, you can change that later in your own system. Now, if we visualize our merge, we should see the buildings. And if we set our timeline back to 0, they should be unsimulated back into place. There we go. Now, if we visualize the last node, the out-city block point cloud, and set our timeline to 600, we should get the same result as before. Let's try that out. That seems to have worked. Let's look at our buildings again. It's a bit easier to see. And sure enough, we have the same building as before plus a filler. Now this in turn means that if we would swap out the buildings for a different building cluster and the block for a different city block, that we should still get the same result and would then be able to run the whole thing for every city block in sequence. Let's try that out. Let's set the timeline back to 0. Let's jump back up. Let's change our city blocks to a different commercial block, so a red one. We can just go into the blast and change the number. Let's find a fairly big one. Number 10 will do. That might cook a little again. That has cooked. It's actually run the cluster simulation automatically already. And if we then change the building clusters as well, instead of houses cluster 3, let's use commercial cluster 3. So change this to input 3. Let's go back up to object level. To avoid it from cooking every time, you could just turn off the city block sim node, because now it's going to try and visualize it from object level as well. For now, let's give it a second to cook, and let's jump back into city block sim. And let's see what happens if we visualize the final point cloud and set our timeline to 600. And that seems to have worked as well. Let's visualize the merge node. So we can see that we have 4 buildings who made it in from the original simulated block, and 2 filler buildings made it into the center. And again, they all fit inside the city block and align to the edges. And of course, as this time we only have commercial buildings, we have a lot less because they're way bigger than the houses. We've confirmed that we have a consistent output from our system, which means that we can go ahead and actually automate the system in the next clip. Let's just visualize the final out node and leave it there.